After World War II, they were saying Mars, but when you get to yeah, but when you get to the 60s and 70s, they were saying no, we're from a planetary system.
To go back to the beginning of what we were getting at, like, did you, as a child, did you subscribe to, like, oh, UFOs come here and visit us, or were you just totally unsure?
I didn't get into UFOs. I was basically interested in the stuff that we could see and measure, the stars, the galaxies. But when I was 16, I was the director of observations for the Astronomical Society in Vancouver, British Columbia. And I remember telling all the other members, we need to have a booth at the Pacific National Exhibition. And said, hey, we can get all these people visiting our booth to help grind our mirrors. So we get a lot of free labor. Let them grind our mirrors for us. But they put us right next to the Flying Saucer Club. So people would visit the Flying Saucer Club, then they come over and say, hey, what do you think? And I'd say, well, what you saw was not a flying saucer. It was the planet Venus, or it was the Pleiades, or you saw a fireball go through the atmosphere. And so I was able to explain about 99% of what people thought was a UFO. But there was 1% that didn't fall into the category of a natural explanation, secret military activity, or a hoax. And this
Can you explain that 1% and what that is?
I can now. At that time, I couldn't, mainly because I wasn't a follower of Jesus Christ yet. But when I became a Christian, I realized it's not just physical reality. There's non-physical reality. The angelic realm is real, but not physical.
So you believe that any quote-unquote UFOs are angel and demon related?
Well, what I first discovered is these UFO phenomena, the 1%, not the 99%, they clearly violate the laws of physics. They're observed going through the atmosphere at thousands of miles per hour, yet there's no sonic boom. There's no heat friction trail behind the, quote, craft. And there's 2,000 cases where they're documented as they're crashing into the Earth. You go to the crash site, you see a shallow crater. If there's snow, the snow is melted. If there's vegetation, the vegetation is damaged. But when you go around the crater site, there's no artifacts, there's no debris. It's like when an airplane crashes into the Earth, there's lots of debris to recover. With a UFO, there's nothing. But the fact that you got a crater, the fact that you got melted snow and damaged vegetation, something real must have done that. And yet they violate the laws of physics. And I'm not alone. There's 6 physicists besides myself that have spent at least a decade studying the UFO phenomena. They all agree with the one who's put the most research into it. That's Jacques Vallée. He's a French astrophysicist.
Yes. He's friends with our guy, James Fox.
Yes. Well, he basically says we're dealing with something interdimensional. Yes. It's something that's not constrained by the dimensions of the universe. You mention angels, they would be a possible explanation because they're interdimensional beings. So that's a possibility. The other thing I noticed is that it was Alan Hynek, the American astrophysicist in the 60s, that came up with the term close encounters.
Yeah.
Because he made the point, it's the close encounters that are difficult to explain. And that's where you come within 500 feet of the UFO phenomena. That's
there's 3 kinds. There's 3 kinds, right?
Yeah, first kind, you come within less than 500 feet of the phenomena. Second kind is where there's communication going on.
Yes.
So he says, we're dealing with beings. These are interdimensional beings because there's communication going on. And then Jacques Vallée and others have made the point, we're dealing with something that is not benevolent. Because when people have these close encounters, it's always harmful. The best you're going to come away with is recurring, terrifying nightmares. Worst case scenario, you get killed by the phenomena, or your animals get killed or injured.
Harmful
Harmful to
just
the human.
After?
Harmful to the human contactee.
Yeah, but during?
During or after.
So there are a lot of supposed sightings where it's not during, and I could think of some
does
where it's
happen.
not
Yes.
like are you familiar with the 94 Zimbabwe?
Yeah, well, I mean, as I mentioned, often there's nothing happening at the moment, but they wind up having these nightmares that recur. I mean, that's very commonly reported amongst the 1%.
But so those children, for people who aren't familiar with that case, we discussed it in episode 138 with James Fox. But those children were part of like an international school in Zimbabwe. They were playing on like the edge of the school grounds, and they reported these beings who were the size of them, who were friendly, and were observing them, and were communicating with them telepathically. And I believe what the message that they were sending to the children was that you humans need to be careful with your technology. I'm paraphrasing here. You need to be careful with your technology because you could destroy yourself. And then if you look at James's other big case that he actually just made a documentary on, Moment of Contact, which we did another podcast, number 139, specifically on that one.
Aqui, ó. Aqui. Aqui. Aqui, ó.
Here.
Aqui, ó. Aqui, ó.
Here.
Aqui, ó. Aqui. Aqui, ó. Puf. Aqui, ó. A cerca da casa era aquela, ó. Foi aqui que caiu. Seres morreram aqui.
In that case, one of the sightings was the message was, you humans have no idea what your potential is. And so I point these out because neither of these are negative things. Neither of these are satanic things to say to somebody, right? And so doesn't that put a little bit of a hole in that argument that it's always negative?
Well, for example, this is not a new phenomenon. It's been going on for thousands of years. And so, like, you've got the Irish talking about leprechauns. I mean, they appear in different forms. What I find interesting is that with the UFO phenomena, it was slow-moving dirigibles in the atmosphere 100 years ago. World War II, it was the Foo Fighters moving at the speed of sound. Today, they're moving at 25,000 miles per hour. They seem to be keeping pace with our aircraft technology. And they keep changing their story. 100 years ago, they said we're from the backside of the moon. When the lay public became aware that's not credible, they said, well, we're from Venus. When people became aware of how warm it is on the surface of Venus, they said we're from Mars. Now they're saying they're from another planetary system. So the fact that we see the stories changing and the way...
When did they say, just brush up my history a little bit, when did they say Venus and Mars? Like, when are some of those sightings? Are those, I assume, pre-World War II?
That's pre-World War II. Yeah, and after World War II, they were saying Mars, but when you get to
They did?
Yeah. But when you get to the 60s and 70s, they were saying, no, we're from a planetary system.
I mean, I believe you, but I mean, not that I know all these cases at all. I definitely don't. I just wasn't familiar with cases since World War II where there was being saying where they were from.
Well, again, you'll find phenomena, and this, if you go back 1,000 years, that wasn't happening at all, mainly because people weren't interested in aerial phenomena. They had no experience of aerial phenomena. So only when humans were engaged in aerial phenomena do we see UFOs. So they're basically trying to manifest themselves. As I said, 100 years ago, dirigibles. World War II, Foo Fighters. Now they're moving as fast as our fastest spacecraft.
What are dirigibles?
Oh, that would be, like the Goodyear blimp.
Oh,
so,
that's a new word for me. I didn't know that one.
Okay.
So they were moving. That's kind of slow, no?
That was slow, yeah. But I mean, it's the first aerial phenomena that humans are really familiar with.
Yeah, because you also don't really have anything to compare it to.
Yeah.
Which also could be a problem because then it's like, well, are you just seeing that? Or is your mind seeing what it's already seen once before, which goes into those 99% of cases you talk about? Like, I think, are there people out there who have to be just straight up lying? Yes. like stories that come out.
A lot of that. I
Yes.
mean, I have to deal with people telling me stories all the time. It's like, okay, you didn't really have this experience.
I think some of them, though, aren't lying, though, but they didn't see what they think they saw. I think they truly
true.
believe they saw what they saw. I place a difference there. The difficulty is seeing if there's that small sliver of cases where, you know, that 1% you talk about, where
Right.
they really did see something and it's inexplicable. But you're getting at the angel demon thing.
Well, one thing that I find interesting is that you got a number of cases where the human contactee goes into a trance and they begin to compose on a computer or a typewriter. So, for example, there are 4 UFO religions here in the United States, 4 significant ones. And they're based on something called the Urantia book.
Okay.
It's a big, thick book that was communicated from so-called UFO beings to human contactees. And, you know, it talks about technology and all this stuff, but almost a third of its total content is denying that Jesus Christ is God. It's like, okay, that's a red flag. Why all this focus on trying to convince people that Jesus isn't God? And then the other thing you notice is that people do have harmful experiences. So how do you explain that? And how do you explain the fact that the message keeps changing with respect to time? And what I find particularly interesting, because I was in the Soviet Union when the Soviets were still running the show, and they had me speak to their scientists. And they basically, and what's interesting, what they told me is, if we catch you sharing your Christian faith with anyone except a scientist, we'll deport you immediately.
Whoa. All right, back up.
Okay.
The Soviets had you speaking to their scientists during the Cold War.
During the Cold War.
Obviously, because
Yeah.
it was still the Soviets.
Yeah.
And they let you back in America?
And let me back in America. Well, they even paid my expenses within, so you know they took care of our.
I know, but we let you back in? I don't know about that one. Am I getting a spook in the very first sit down here? I don't know.
Well, it's an interesting experience because they said, look, the reason why we're letting you speak to our scientists, they go to international conferences. They were very honest with me and said, we're bringing you here. We know you're a Christian, and we know what you're all about, and we're basically appeasing our scientists. And so they get to pick the talks that you give. In fact, they had me. I had to give a list of 30 different lectures I could give. Some to do with Christianity, some that had nothing to do with Christianity. And they basically said, the scientists that you speak to, they'll pick the lecture, not you. They pick. They always wanted me to talk on Christianity and science. And a lot of them wanted me to talk on UFOs. A good third of my lectures were on UFOs. But I found out why. Because a lot of them had UFO experiences, way more than 1%. And I also discovered that these were scientists that were involved in occult research. That was a time when the Soviet Union was sponsoring occult physics.
Thank you for watching the video, guys. If you haven't already subscribed, please smash that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here or in the description below.